My story actually started before I was even born. It all began in a city in South Korea with a lot of conflict putting my family under constant threat. My mother was a single parent, and as much as she would have loved to, emigrating out of the country wasn't an option for her. While my mother was pregnant, she became more worried about how she was going to look after me, provide me with the things I needed, and keep me safe at the same time. This was when she met a man through a friend who said he could take me to America, have me adopted with a caring family, and give me a future that would be near impossible to achieve if I stayed where she was. Not only would I be given things that she could only dream of giving me, but all this time, we would be kept in contact. She could call me and I could call her when I got old enough to understand what was happening. At first, my mom wouldn't even consider this. Sure, it sounded great for me, but she wasn't just going to trust a man she had just met to take her child away from her. After the weeks went by, this friend of a friend was around more and more. She had gone from hardly knowing he existed to seeing him at every meetup and day out they went on. He seemed like a nice guy. He was friendly and he didn't bring up that conversation again after she had originally said no. This was until around 2 weeks later. Although she initially brushed it off as a terrible idea, she couldn't help but think about it, and having him around so much just kept it fresh on her mind all of the time. My child could be given a new life, things I could never provide, she would think. But who was this man, and what were his motivations? The more time that went by and the closer he got to her, the more she trusted him. He seemed like a genuine guy who really cared for the safety and well-being of the children in his country. I know how hard this decision was for my mom, but after some persuasion and reassurance from this man, she agreed. When I was born, I would travel with him to America where I would be placed into a loving home. The reality was very different to this, and far worse than anyone could ever imagined. After she gave birth, things happened very quickly. There was no time for her to think anymore, and no time for her to change her mind. As soon as I was out of the hospital, I was collected, and off I went in a plane to my new life. When we arrived, I was quickly handed over to a different man. I won't use his real name, but let's call him Sean. For the first 3 years of my life, Sean was a perfectly fine father to me, looking after me and caring for me like I was his own. Then, after my 3rd birthday, things changed. Sean took off his loving, caring mask to reveal who he really was. After a couple of years of this, when I was around 5 years old, we started traveling around. We would go to hotels, motels, and sometimes places that seemed like people's homes. When inside these places, I would be touched by different people, and often multiple people at each place. I remember the feeling of being alone, and I was afraid of being with these people. Every time I would close my eyes and try and block it all out, but through my closed eyes, I would see the camera flashes reminding me of what was happening. When everything was over, I would always see Sean collecting money. I don't know if Sean hated me or loved me, and in fact, I'm not sure if I loved or hated him at the time. What I do know is I hated these other men. I was scared of the things they did to me, and when I got back in the car to travel home with Sean, I felt safe again. This feeling of safety was very easy to associate with love and a sense of trust that no matter what happened when we were there, I always knew he would take me home. Over the years, we moved around a lot. Like, 1 year we'd be in LA, and the next we'd be in Indiana. Then, when I was 10, Sean came to me and said, "Hey, we're going on holiday. We're going to go to Australia to see some friends." At first, I assumed it was going to be like every other trip we'd ever been on. But then, he showed me some pictures of his friends. It was a woman, and she had a young girl. Something felt different to me this time. Was this going to be an actual holiday? He began to explain to me that this woman needed us to help her with her daughter. She was really struggling, and she needed us to help with the adoption. I was told I just had to speak with her and tell her how much of a great father he had been to me, and how great my life was. I agreed. I mean, I was only 10. I didn't have much choice, but I look back on this trip now with deep sadness and regret. We went on this trip, and sure enough, I played my part in convincing this woman to give up her child for adoption. The woman agreed and had her child adopted. This was the last I heard of the poor girl, but I can only imagine she was put into a life similar to my own. As I got older, especially throughout my teenage years, I began to realize that what had happened to me over the years was wrong. Very wrong. I had even now been getting told that under no circumstances could I tell anyone what it was we did. Almost as if I was a part of it, and if I told anyone, I would be in serious trouble. I didn't know who I could turn to. When I was 13, I made the decision that I was going to tell my teacher what had been happening. I was scared. I felt dirty for everything that had happened to me and didn't know how he would react to what I was going to say. That day, I felt sick. Sean took me to school and dropped me off like it was any other day, but in my mind, this might be the last time he would see me. I told my teacher that day. He sat and listened to what I had to say, then led me to his office. I was that day, in his office, by one of the only people I thought I could turn to at the time. I told myself that would be the last time I would say anything to anyone again. Everyone is the same, and I spent the next few years this way. Every year my mother would call me on my birthday, and every year I would lie to her and tell her how great my life was. She pictured this perfect life that I had built up for her to believe over the years of holidays, gifts, and of loving family. This was until my 16th birthday. She called and began speaking to me. I wasn't even listening to her words. I couldn't. Everything she said just sounded like a distant humming. I sat there, pressed in the corner of my room, until I broke down. I just couldn't keep it inside anymore. I told her everything that had happened to me over the years. I don't know how long I spoke for, but I felt a release like I had not felt before. This was only the second person I had ever told the truth to. When I finished speaking, she cried, and it broke my heart. Telling her was the hardest thing I have ever done, and the last thing I wanted to do was make her sad. She told me, begged me that I had to go to the police and tell them what had been happening. She assured me it wasn't my fault. I spent the next week thinking about everything she had said to me. Please go to the police. Everything will be fine. I've tried confiding in people before, and that didn't work out so well for me. The next week, I had finally found enough courage to go to the police. As I walked up the road towards the police station, I didn't know where my future would lead me or what would happen to me. When I pushed open the doors of the police station and stepped inside, I felt like I was already safe. I sat down on the plastic chairs in the waiting room and cried until an officer came over to me and guided me into the back. It's been 6 years since I stepped foot in that building, and they've been the best 6 years of my life. Sean was arrested, and I haven't seen him since that day, along with many other people they discovered who were involved with the same network, who did this to me and other children. I'm now 22 years old. I still feel all of the shame of what I went through, and I find it very difficult trusting new people. With regular counseling sessions and the love of my partner and his son, I hope one day to be healed from my wounds. Around 1.2 million children are trapped each year, so I know I am not alone. I just hope they can all find a way out like I managed and can move on to lead somewhat normal lives. If this affects you or anyone you might know, Speak to the police or someone you can trust.